Awesome. Thank you, Sean. And let me be the first to welcome Alexander Wang to USPTL and to our very own InventionCon. We're so excited to have you with us this afternoon.
Thanks so much for having me, Debbie.
It's fabulous to take this opportunity and to share some of the insights. I would like to give our audience a little bit of background about Alexander. He is the CEO of Scale AI, a startup company that he co-founded in 2016 and has a variety of clients, including such clients as General Motors, Flexport, Toyota, and the list goes on. And I'm hopeful that our chat today will focus a little bit about his journey in Silicon Valley, his entrepreneurial achievements, and the role that intellectual property played in his current success and probably into the future. So super excited to have you, Alexander.
Yeah, no, I was excited to be able to speak at InventionCon, and I think we'll get right into it. But IP and all that has been really critical to our success and our ability to build our business. So yeah, excited to dive in.
Awesome. Well, let's go. Why don't you? I gave a little background on you, very little. How about you kind of share with the audience a little bit about maybe yourself? Again, background, journey.
Yeah, totally. So I grew up in Los Alamos, New Mexico. So both my parents are physicists, and they worked at the national lab there. That sort of originally was sort of this was the birthplace of the atomic bomb and sort of this place of incredible intellectual and scientific study. So I grew up very close to sort of this this hub of innovation and this hub of sort of scientific discovery, which always inspired me and really excited me. And, my parents would always we would always talk about, recent scientific discoveries and how that has impacted the world. And so that was a lot of my background. And then I sort of fell in love with computing and computers and sort of everything that was happening with information technology. And so when I graduated from high school, I actually came out to Silicon Valley to work as an engineer and just sort of experience the innovation that was happening here in Silicon Valley firsthand. And it became really obvious that artificial intelligence was the sort of the most exciting technology of the bunch. Obviously, there was so much exciting technology that was impacting all of information technology and sort of the smartphone and location services and sort of the advent of all these social networks. But artificial intelligence was really the sort of the most exciting nugget of all of it, and is the one that sort of felt the most inspirational to me because when you sort of grow up programming, or when you learn programming, you realize that you're actually really constrained with what the with what the computers can do. The sort of black and white instructions, and they have to follow these very simple instructions sort of to a T. And the sort of promise of artificial intelligence was that all of a sudden you could give computers more judgment, and they could sort of make a lot more nuanced decisions that would just open up the possibilities for what could be accomplished with computing. And I was really excited because I think it meant that like artificial intelligence could be used in a wide variety of different end applications. So, and I think it frankly could have solved a lot of the biggest problems that we face as a human race. So one is medical care. There's a 10x shortage of doctors and medical care globally. Most people just don't have any ability to get the medical care that they need. And one of the few ways that the few technologies that actually is going to be able to make a dent in that is artificial intelligence. Another one is climate. Similarly, I think the world has a really big challenge when it comes to climate and how we're going to manage all of that, and how we are able to use our energy more efficiently, use our resources more efficiently overall. And artificial intelligence is one of the best solutions to that for helping us navigate and use our resources more wisely. And then one that's become really relevant recently is sort of geopolitical tensions and how artificial intelligence can be used to sort of enable a safer, more peaceful world. And so the technology felt really impactful and seemed to be the most valuable thing I could possibly work on. And so I went to MIT to study it. I very quickly dropped out of MIT to start Scale, and the entire goal was, how do we enable artificial intelligence to sort of actually become usable and get into the hands of as many organizations as possible, as quickly as possible. And that was, as you mentioned, back in 2016. Since then, we've sort of been hard at work across a wide variety of industries. So we work with the automotive industry. We work with companies like, as you mentioned, General Motors and Toyota, and work with some of the most innovative companies in that realm. And then we also work with large e-commerce companies, companies like Instacart or Meta. And we work with some of the other large technology and research organizations like OpenAI and Microsoft. And then more recently, we've worked in areas like logistics with Flexport, and then also with the U.S. government very closely. So primarily working with the Department of Defense and working on defense technologies. So we've now worked to apply AI to a wide variety of industries, and the work is not done. We're still sort of on a march to make sure that every possible industry and company is going to be able to use artificial intelligence to build a better world.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate them. I'll start kind of at the beginning where you said your parents being physicists are your first inspiration, and then I think maybe your interest in STEM from the engineering part from a very young age. So we would be happy to have a conversation with you. Since you mentioned the DoD, that you're helping them out, maybe there's some part that could help with the USPTO and its efforts. We certainly are on a journey to capitalize, like you said, to use AI in terms of helping our patent examiners, our trademark examining attorneys just be more efficient, right? It doesn't replace them. It helps us get that data in front of them in a meaningful way for their decision making. So certainly won't pass up an opportunity to engage perhaps later. I guess my next kind of question is, did you talked about the science, the engineering, the drive. Did you have at an early age maybe a sense of being an entrepreneur? What was that journey like for you?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Well, so my both my parents are sort of hardcore scientists, and so I grew up originally wanting to be a sort of proper research scientist, and I have two brothers, and they both got PhDs. My parents both have PhDs, so everyone in my family has sort of gone the more research and academic route, and so that always, from a young age, that was kind of the path that was inspiring. But one of the things that I think that was happening in computer science and computing that was really interesting at the time was how much of the innovation was being driven in the private sector versus the public sector, which is very different from, my parents' field of physics. Physics is, a lot of the innovation is driven through universities and sort of open research, whereas in computer science and computing, a lot of it was driven in the private sector through a very innovative, Silicon Valley, obviously an incredibly innovative hub, and sort of the tech industry is sort of compounded on that and sort of continued to grow from that sort of initial hub of innovation. And so I sort of realized at a certain point that if I wanted to be able to drive as much progress in artificial intelligence and really drive as much impact using this technology as possible, that doing it through the private sector was going to be the best way to do that. And it was actually really daunting. I think we'll probably talk about this more later, but it was really daunting at first to think about starting my own company versus doing it as a part of a much larger company, because of the fact that in AI and in technology, there's these really big behemoth companies that have a lot of resources, a lot of talent, are doing a lot of great research, and so that's one of the things that was really scary or made the path really uncertain. But I think we'll talk in a bit about how thinking about that from the lens of IP and thinking about how to protect our IP made that a lot less scary and a lot more feasible. So.
Yeah, I think, again, and it's so great to have you here, because your story of not only the AI itself, the development of AI to help, as you mentioned, in a variety of fields, medical, climate. It's also that part of you that has to protect your own IP, as you said, beginning your own company, having a trademark for Scale AI, something like that, and perhaps some inventive concepts along the way. But speaking about your company in particular, and I saw your mission statement, and I'll just read it for everyone here in the audience. It says to accelerate the development of AI applications. And so I thought maybe I would ask you, how do you really start that conversation with a company? Do they approach you? Do you go to them? Is there a challenge? If you wanted to maybe give us a little bit of a peek at that experience.
Yeah, totally. So it's really interesting, because the original inspiration, going back to the early moments of Scale, the initial inspiration was that I wanted to build a side project of my own using artificial intelligence. So I wanted to build a camera inside my refrigerator that would tell me when my roommates in college were stealing my food. And I tried working on this and I tried building it out, and very, very quickly I realized that it was going to be almost impossible without focusing on the data, which is something that I'm sure you all know super well, given the sort of volume and magnitude of patent and trademark applications that you all see. But it really dawned on me that the most important thing was going to be starting with the data, building the right foundations when it came to the data. And unless you were able to do that, you wouldn't have any chance at building great artificial intelligence, or you wouldn't have any shot at building all the cool tech that people thought about in the future. So we really adopted that within how we've built out Scale and how we've built out our products to enable what we call data-centric AI. So how do you solve AI problems? By first focusing on the data and the data sets, and then once you build that foundation up, then you can build all these incredible applications on top of that. So that's really the approach and sort of philosophy and mindset that we've taken. And so then when we go into organizations, early on it was a lot more of us going to other companies and us going to other firms. Now, it's a healthy mix of both. We still go out, but there's some people who come to us. When we talk to them, what we always set out to do first is really map out, what does their data strategy look like? What does their data foundations look like today? And where do we think that needs to get to basically enable all of the incredible innovation using artificial intelligence on top of that? And then once we get the data foundations in place, then we can do all the cool stuff that you see all these great demos and all these great examples of in the news.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate the comments on data as a foundation. Here at the USPTO, we are on a journey of thinking of data as we call it, an enterprise asset. And I think that is very similar to how you see the use of data, data-centric decision making. So I think we're certainly in alignment there, and recognize, I guess, the use of structured and unstructured data,
Yeah.
I'm sure companies come to you with all sorts of, I'll just say, unique formats. Could you comment on that, perhaps?
Yeah, totally. This is one of the really exciting things I think about artificial intelligence and where we're at today. You know, I think similarly, we often tell folks that, hey, you know, I know right now it seems like just getting to the cloud and getting just building out your initial tech stack feels like the most strategic important thing. But for the next phase of computing and artificial intelligence, all this stuff, your data is really going to be the core valuable asset that's going to sort of power you. You know, we often refer to the data as the fuel that's going to sort of, you know, launch a trajectory into this sort of next phase of artificial intelligence, machine learning, data science, et cetera. And one of the things that we see with a lot of firms, so there was sort of phase one of machine learning and artificial intelligence, which was primarily based off of, you know, structured data primarily. So tabular structured data. And that was using techniques like, you know, linear regressions, logistic regressions, SVMs, you know, these sort of more traditional machine learning methods. And then what happened, you know, now it's a little more than a decade ago, was at Stanford, there was this breakthrough sort of bundle of research around processing of imagery. So there was this professor, her name was Dr. Fei-Fei Li, who sort of built out this massive data set of images and basically built out this data foundation for the entire community to go and do research on image recognition and image processing. And it blew the field wide open because all of a sudden we started using neural networks and what's now called deep learning to start processing this kind of imagery, and we were able to get to superhuman performance on processing and understanding of imagery. Now, fast forward, you know, the decade plus, you know, 12, 13 years since that time, now we have world-class AI functionality that can process text and language. It can process imagery, it can process videos, audio, it can process all those together. And so, and if you think about what's the data that's being created now, even in our interaction, this is all sort of video data. And if you think about, you know, we're all talking to one another on the phone or on video, or we're communicating with each other on text. So a lot of the data that will serve as the foundation for the future of most enterprises is all this unstructured data. And you know, one of the visuals we have when we talk about this is kind of like an iceberg. It's you know, the top bit of the iceberg, which is like the top 10% or top 20%, is all your structured data, and that's the start of your journey. But then there's all this unstructured data sort of lurking beneath the surface that you know, is ripe to take advantage of and really enable your sort of journey in artificial intelligence. So when we go to firms, what we always say, when you go to our customers, when you go to prospective customers, we always say is, you know, your structured data is awesome, and that's step one, and we got to do it and we got to look at it. But really the exciting piece and the part that's going to start enabling all the sort of really exciting ideas that you have and enabling the sort of really transformational ideas that you have, that's all going to be in the unstructured data realm.
Yeah, definitely the visual of the iceberg is in many ways, right? Don't hit it, no pun intended, but that unstructured, and certainly it comes to mind that simple transactional data becomes some of that part of that iceberg that you don't see, or you don't really, I'll say, qualify it in some respects until all of a sudden you're starting with a challenge or an opportunity problem to solve, and you realize, oh gosh, we do have some information available to it, but it's not in a format that we can readily use and mine. So I definitely appreciate that again, your company starting with that foundational piece. The other thing is interesting, it's not lost on us in the CIO shop that there's plenty of companies out there that will use, come to us for AI. We've got data and analytics for you to use. We're the best of the analytics, and we've got visualization and dashboards, and you just need to come join us and let us in and we'll solve all of your AI capabilities. So with that as a landscape, both public and private companies out there, what kind of sets your company apart? I know you talked a little bit about how you approach the clients, but what might set your company apart, and why your company versus someone else's?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and we get it all the time, as you might imagine. So I think there's a few pieces. I think the first is that if you look at a lot of the work that most companies have done in AI for the past 5 years, a lot of that has been, unfortunately, these projects that they haven't really delivered on the promise, and they haven't. There's a lot of organizations that feel oversold on artificial intelligence, feel like, hey, we were really excited about it, but it didn't kind of deliver on the promise. Either the algorithms didn't work well enough, or the sort of technology was too brittle, or maybe it delivered some cool results initially, but then it didn't produce recurring value after that. So I think that we're sort of in this environment, despite all the headlines and despite all the incredible things you see in the news, we're in this environment that's more akin to, hey, a lot of people, I think people are still excited about AI, but they're very skeptical, and they want to see stuff actually work and actually impact, and transform their business. And so that's frankly, a lot of times when people ask that question, almost under the cover, what they're asking is, does your technology actually work? And is it going to actually work to solve problems for my business? Or is it just going to be a bunch of cool demoware that looks really cool, but then, once the shine comes off, is it actually helping us do things better or more efficiently or more intelligently? And so a lot of what we have done from a product standpoint, and a lot of what we've done from a technology standpoint is twofold. I think the first is, again, really getting into the guts of the data. And one of the things that we say internally is we do kind of like the dirty jobs of data or the dirty jobs of AI. We are not afraid to get our hands dirty and really get in there and figure out everything that's going on with the data to actually enable us to not build a fancy demo, but actually make sure that we're doing something that's sustainable and will have continued impact in the future. And then the second thing is, we always are really focused on the so what. So what's the business value? What's the efficiency gain? What's going to be the sort of transformation to the business? And rather than sort of be focused on the technology for technology's sake, which is what a lot of companies I think out there do, we're really focused on the technology in service of a goal, in service of a mission. And we always instrument a lot of metrics to make sure that we're making progress along that. And I think that shows in our track record. And one of the reasons why, everywhere from the big tech companies like Meta and Microsoft, all the way to large enterprises like Toyota, General Motors, as all the way to the US DoD and the US Army, the reason why we have success across so many organizations is because we really get in there and we work very hard to prove the value of the technology that you're using, and we care about that more than almost anything else.
That's fabulous, and certainly at the CIO, one of our important themes and principles, it's mission first and a business value delivery first. So I think it really resonates with me when you mentioned providing the value to the business, and we think about that in our space, and I kind of mentioned it at the beginning with our patent examiners and our trademark examining attorneys, allowing them to be more efficient in their decision making, presenting the data in a way that makes it possible. The other thing I thought was interesting when you said, it's after the shiny wears off, really capturing the business value in terms of perhaps hours saved. There are some rote activities, perhaps. Maybe it's in a procurement or CFO field where they're, moving documents across the platforms of sorts. But that's very, very interesting. And I'm super, I'll say, excited to hear I'll just say your value proposition in the company versus others, because I too hear about those similar, look what we can do. And then there's really not the content, the concreteness that's left over once they've shown you a pretty picture, if that's the right word.
Totally. Yeah. And what we see in the market all the time is a lot of folks, this is their experience. They see something really cool and they get really excited and they try it and they test it. And then the end users, whoever that is in the enterprise who try that product, the experience is like, hey, this doesn't really work like the demo. It makes a bunch of mistakes. It doesn't actually make me any faster. And they get really frustrated and they just turn it off because it isn't reliable enough. And that comes from, lack of understanding of the data, lack of understanding of the actual business use case, lack of understanding around what the end users actually need to be successful. And, all those things, it's so easy to go from a alluring demo to a pilot, but it's so hard to get from, to actually build a product that adds value and makes people more effective and more efficient.
Yeah, and I'll just pull that thread a little bit more. AI, so much as, and you kind of mentioned it at the a couple of questions ago, just the learning capability and the algorithms or the models that can then learn to improve that product. Could you talk a little bit about that? That's the somewhat unseen, unknown part of AI.
Yeah, totally. I think that one of the, one thing that's really important to understand about artificial intelligence is it is not perfect, and in particular, it's not robust and reliable. And what that means is it's not something that's just magically going to solve all of your problems. But when you use it in the right circumstances, and if you know the right circumstances to use it, then it can be incredibly, incredibly valuable. So to give an example, you can't use artificial intelligence or AI to just fully automate decisions that humans are making right now, because humans have, apply a lot of judgment, have a lot of context, and have an ability to understand things that, frankly, the AI are not going to be able to understand. And so if you do that, you're going to be disappointed with the outcomes, and you're going to be disappointed with what happens. But to your point, if you think about it more in terms of, let's say the AI is more about surfacing the relevant bits of information and making sure that certain bits of information are not missed or lost at all. That's really, really useful and valuable, because, maybe sometimes it'll surface something that's actually not that helpful, which is fine. The person's just going to read over it and, it won't be that helpful, but, no harm done. But then if it's able to bring stuff up that is actually really important and stuff that should not be missed, then it provides a lot of value in the process and makes the overall process more efficient and efficacious. So we think about that a lot. One example that we've worked on is actually in the insurance industry. And in the insurance industry, it's really interesting when, God forbid, if let's say I got into an accident and that, my car got dinged up and my insurance company is trying to figure out, okay, how much does that entitle me to be paid in a claim? It's about making sure that all the relevant details about this case get surfaced properly to the person making the decision. So what's my driving history like? What are the details about the particular crash? Like, what did I say that happened? What did the other person say happened? How do those match up? what is the driving history of the other person look like? So what are all the facts that can help contribute to drive a good decision? And if you can surface all those facts more quickly so that people aren't digging, that makes their lives easier and makes their job easier. But if you try to just have an AI decide that on its own automatically, it's just not going to make the right decision a lot of the time. So that's a lot of how we think about it, is like decision support, augmentation versus sort of like actually fully automating the decision, which I think is really tough.
Yeah, definitely. We're thinking along the same lines there. So that definitely resonates with us here at the USPTO. And I have to ask, we are at the USPTO Invention Con. So what types of IP protection does your company have?
Yeah,
give us a list.
I actually should check on the trademark bit, because I wish I should know that off the back of my I should know that just obviously, but we definitely have a number of patents that protect a number of techniques that we've built in terms of data processing and understand and being able to process vast amounts of unstructured data, and then more recently some of our approach to some of the algorithms that we built on top. And that's actually been really, really critical for us as a business. In the world of AI, we're going up against giants. We're going up against like these really, really big, scary companies, and a lot of what we have to think about is like, how do we make sure that if we are really innovative and we are developing really novel technology, that's protected and that we're able to build our business off of it, versus some of these really large innovative companies being able to use some of the innovative technology that we build. And so that always has been something that's been very top of mind for us, and strategically something that we've considered a lot. And one of the things that has enabled us to be successful, frankly, is that when we have these novel discoveries and we can patent them, that protects our ability to basically build a stable base of innovations and IP and sort of discoveries that allow us to operate our business in the long run. So it's been hugely, hugely important, the patents at a minimum that we've gotten, and the ability to, as we've grown and as we've gotten more innovative, we continue to file patents and continue to sort of protect all these great innovations that that our team produces. So that's been really important to us, and we're definitely very appreciative of the work that the USPTO does to enable us to get to protect our IP.
And definitely. So thank you for that. I think you mentioned the importance, the significance of having them for that protection, and again in the expansion part, gaining more as you go. So as your company is growing and developing more, you do need that additional protection. I guess my follow-up kind of question to that is, when did that like light bulb moment on protection kind of come to you? Because again, I'm thinking back in 2016, you're storming, forming, and norming on this new I'll say AI journey. And so what led you to the USPTO, not specifically, but protection in general?
Yeah, I think this is a case where thankfully we just got a lot of great advice, and this is something where I wouldn't have known. When you're sort of starting a business from scratch, you usually don't know what's going to matter in the future, what to pay attention to, what can hamstring you significantly as a business, and but then thankfully there's a great culture of sort of mentorship and advice and pay it forward advice giving in Silicon Valley. And one of our early advisors kind of mentioned to us is like, hey, if you are serious about what you want to build, which is you're serious about enabling AI for all these industries, and you're serious about taking a lot of this best in class technology and actually making that useful for the broader world, then it's going to be really important that you do it in a way such that, it's going to, that where somebody can't just sort of come in behind and utilize all the great innovations that you and your team produce. And I actually, frankly, I think I vaguely thought about that as something that, maybe would be important, but then I think it really, there's all these famous. They pointed me to sort of like the string of sort of famous IP cases in the tech industry, which especially in the early legs of the tech industry, when a lot of companies weren't as careful and didn't have as good advice, it was really common for there to be these kinds of disputes and struggles, and so kind of very early on got the advice, hey, you got to be really thoughtful. Artificial intelligence is a very innovative industry, and it's an industry where lots and lots of companies are investing very meaningfully. And you need to be able to protect. If you have great technologists and build great technology, and you develop novel techniques and novel innovations, you got to be able to protect those, because if not, you're sort of inviting a lot of competition. And so it came pretty early, and then in the early days, maybe we filed for one patent, and then that got approved, and then now we're sort of and then maybe the next year we filed another 2 patents, and then next year maybe 3 patents, and so it's been obviously we have to keep up the innovation to be able to keep filing the patents, but it's been this thing that has sort of naturally grown and sort of sprouted within our company. And the people at our company with the patents, it's a great testament to their work and a great testament to their sort of innovative engineering and sort of discovery within the company. And they're really proud of it, and I'm proud of them for it. And I think that there's a lot to be proud of to be able to drive forward innovation so meaningfully. And it's a really exciting thing, because it actually creates a culture internally where, we celebrate that innovation, and we want more and more of that innovation to happen, and that allows us to continue fueling the sort of engine of our business, because kind of, again, I've alluded to this a bunch of times, but artificial intelligence is moving really, really quickly. If we aren't always on the forefront innovating, then there's going to be someone else who's innovating faster than us. So it's really quite incredibly important to have this sort of this engine and this sort of culture around innovation, and a way to celebrate that via our patents. So anyway, I think it's thankful to the person who gave me that advice, and it's just been such an incredible thing for us at Scale.
Yeah, I'm also thankful, because of obviously we also like to celebrate not only the filings of applications, the actual patents, and that's certainly not only to the U.S. history, you're part of this large community of inventors, but certainly facilitating not only your particular industry, I'll say, and the U.S. economy, and driving that efforts going forward. I guess my last kind of question might be, people might be wondering, hey, you're in this this journey to build your company. It's maybe in the $1 billion range. How does a leader like yourself, maybe you mentioned innovation, right? And continually innovate. And yet, Alexandra, you are leading your company. So how do you balance that role? And then also maybe even let's throw in some work-life balance into that equation. So I see that being I'll say, an interesting equation, and just curious how you might tackle your day, your week, your month.
Totally. Yeah, no, I think for so I would say first and foremost, I think the most important thing that I can do is be humble about what I know and I don't know. And frankly, I'm very lucky to be surrounded with a lot of people at scale who have a lot more experience than I do, and have, frankly, are a lot more innovative than I am, and are able to sort of drive forward so many of the great things that we're able to do at scale. And so I think the first is sort of a degree of humility around what I can and can't do, and then accepting sort of the journey to constantly be learning and constantly be trying to find out what I don't know, trying to push those things forward, and try to drive scale to be as innovative and as forward leaning as possible in all these fronts. And I just find that incredibly exciting and enjoyable. I think I maybe this started with my childhood. I love learning, and I love the process of, I love being in a spot where I can constantly learn. I'm sure this is the same for many of the people at the USPTO, because of just the magnitude and variety of ideas that you all see on a daily basis. So it's probably similar from that front. So I think that's a really big part of it. And I think, we operate in such a fast moving space in artificial intelligence. And so a lot of it is really just thinking through, how do we marry, building a great team with our approach to the technology, and have a really evolving approach to how we think about the technology and how we're applying that. Lastly, with, an understanding of our customers and our users, and making sure that we're able to actually, kind of, as we mentioned before, drive the maximum possible sort of benefit and drive the most value for them as possible. So it's really, when I think about leading scale in and of itself, a lot of it is balancing sort of these three components, the technology, our team, and the people that we serve, and making sure that we're able to put on every hat in whatever situation is in basically in every situation. Every decision we make, we have to think about, how does this affect our the people that we serve, how does this affect our team, and how does this affect the technology and the products that we build. So that's a big part of that. And then for work-life balance, I'll say that this is it. I think it's critically important to be able to to do stuff outside of work, so that you can balance everything and ultimately get sort of perspective and distance on the decisions, or the sort of or the potentially even the challenges that we face in trying to build an innovative, disruptive business. And so things that I love to do, hiking is amazing. I grew up in the mountains in New Mexico, so I grew up loving hiking. And then there were a few years, because I moved to the city, where I just stopped doing that. And then I recently have rediscovered my love. and it's just the one of the best things to not only clear your mind, but also be able to see I have the benefit of being able to travel a fair amount, and so being able to see all the places that I go to is big. And then another thing that I find just really valuable for gaining kind of like perspective and distance on the things that we think about is reading, particularly fiction and history, actually. So history, I think, is maybe self-explanatory, but seeing how things have played out throughout history is really interesting, and kind of really drives home that there's been a lot that's happened in the course of human history, and there's a lot that is similar and different, but more similar than you might expect to what's happening today. And then fiction, I think, is just incredible. I think the sort of power of a narrative is really amazing, and I think that being able to sort of put yourselves put yourself in the shoes of, you know, all these different situations through the power of the narrative is one of my favorite things to do.
Wow. Well, thank you. And I think going on your creativity and innovation, there's often many leaders who say, you know, when they step away to find that work-life balance and whatever activity that is, that's when they're the most, they come back and they feel even more creative. So there's something, you know, I'll say a synergy of sorts there. And I appreciate you sharing that and sharing some of your more personal notes with us. I just want to say thank you so much, Alexander. I see Sean is back on with us, and I think I'm going to say again, thank you so much for joining us. It was certainly my pleasure to just learn a little bit more about you today and your journey. So I hope you have a great afternoon, and hopefully we'll see many more of your patents and trademarks our way.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for having me for InventionCon, and great to meet you, Debbie. And this was a lot of fun.